When it comes to public service and making policy, few can compete with our first honoree. I'm talking about John Manley. Let's for a moment reflect on an extraordinary career. Actually, this may take more than a moment because John has had multiple careers, 4 in fact. His career in government alone could fill a book. He's practiced law twice. He led the Business Council of Canada for 9 years and has sat on and chaired many corporate and volunteer boards, including CIBC, TELUS, CAE, and CARE Canada. John would not want us to forget he's also a father and grandfather, and that he's run a bunch of marathons. And of course, he was a very successful politician. He doesn't shy away from strong opinions, and for that, I'm personally grateful. John is frequently a guest on our program. First elected in 1988 as the Liberal MP for Ottawa South, John was appointed Minister of Industry in Jean Chrétien's cabinet, where he became an early exponent of something then called the Information Highway, and insisted that every school in Canada had to have access to the internet. He started Canada on the innovation journey of the 21st century economy. But that wasn't all, as I'm sure you all remember. John quickly became Chrétien's go-to guy, the minister of everything. Industry, foreign affairs, then finance, big ministries with substantial agendas. From 2002 to 2003, he served as Deputy Prime Minister, a position he had twice refused. He figured it would be pushing his luck if he declined Mr. Chrétien's third offer. John was also the point man on 9/11 for the Chrétien government. The world was scared, the United States particularly. It slammed its border shut, a potential catastrophe for Canada. John's American counterpart was Tom Ridge, President Bush's Homeland Security Secretary, with whom he forged a lasting friendship. They came up with the Smart Borders Plan, built on the premise that entry policy should be in keeping with different levels of threat. From that came such initiatives as Nexus, pre-clearance of goods, and the joint inspection of shipping containers in their first port of arrival. So I suppose this means the next time you're able to skirt the security line in the airport, you have John to thank. Reflecting on that challenging period, John says he feels it was important to assure Canadians their government had a plan and a roadmap to keep everyone safe and keep the economy going. This was a time, he believes, when public trust still ran reasonably high, giving governments a greater opportunity to get things done. He looks upon today's complex policy terrain with the mega challenges of the global pandemic and war in Ukraine and says, nobody signs up for this kind of thing, but they have to deal with it anyway. And we're glad John signed up and played an outsized role in building a better country and serving as a role model for succeeding generations of decision makers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Public Policy Forum is proud to add John Manley to our honor roll. Mr. Manley?
It's hollow. Apparently, I was told it's a good place to store your plastic garbage bags. D'abord, I was told that. D'abord, je veux remercier le Forum public de politique publique pour un honneur qui était vraiment spécial pour moi. Thank you to Eddie and to the Public Policy Forum. Eddie said, you've got 5 minutes, only say one thing. So I'm going to do my best. I had to write it down just to try to fit into that category. I'm really grateful, especially because this is a recognition that brings me, at least briefly, back from the category of forgotten but not gone. You may have noticed that the Globe and Mail had an editorial cartoon a few weeks ago which depicted a statue of a, quote, middle-of-the-road political moderate on display in what is clearly a museum of paleontology. And an observer comments, imagine, they once roamed the earth. That was me. Might have been Anne McClellan as well. She's here. So I'd also like to congratulate my fellow honorees, each of whom is worthy and demonstrates, again, the high standard that's been set by the Forum for these events. It's a source of pride for me to share the evening with each of you, but I have to mention Mark McKinnon in particular, because, and I tried to say this to you in person, but I salute your raw courage in seeking the stories and reporting with skill, especially over these last years in Ukraine. And I hate to say this, but you know, I know your parents agree with me because we spoke about it. This award could easily have been posthumous because you don't seem to consider any risk too great for you to challenge it. And by the way, I wrote that before your father told me that he'd volunteered in my first campaign. So, but I really admire the courage. I've been in war zones, but I had lots of people protecting me. The world in which facts are valued, Mark, owes you a great debt. And I live in that world. As Vashi said, I've enjoyed 4 distinct careers over my life so far. As a lawyer, a politician, corporate director, head of the Business Council. Politics began for me with that great free trade election of 1988. I remember going boldly, knocking on doors in the neighborhoods and apartment buildings of my riding of Ottawa South to introduce myself to voters, asking for their support. There was a lot of voter engagement in that election that year. I think it's still one of the highest turnouts ever in a Canadian federal election. And door after door, the same penetrating question was asked of me. Are you related to Elizabeth Manley? Well, I soon learned that the ability to skate is important in politics. But in all of my careers, I have found myself drawn close to public policy. It has been my passion, certainly much more so than politics itself. Thanks to Prime Minister Chrétien, as a minister, I was given broad scope to pursue my interests in science and technology, in innovation, in economic development, in international relations, and in security, and finally in finance. As a corporate director at CIBC, CAE, and TELUS, I've been able to work with great Canadian companies to enhance their reputation as outstanding corporate citizens. I was brought up to be a believer in the importance of government and public policy as a force for good in society, and in public service as a vocation that merits respect. My parents had elementary school education and were of modest means. What they valued was honesty and hard work. When times were tough, we lived in government-subsidized housing. They weren't active politically in any sense, but my dad voted Liberal and my mom voted Conservative, and dinner in our Irish household was understood to be a time when political debate would occur, and it was vigorous. They had their views, but I never once heard a leader denigrated as corrupt. They convinced me that political leaders were to be respected. They also made education a priority, and it was access to an excellent public education system that opened the doors of opportunity for me. So I am in no small measure a product of benevolent, progressive public policy. So in that context, I offer just a few observations based on my life and experience so far. First, the problems in the domain of public policy are today as complex, multifaceted, interconnected, and global as any ever seen in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of our country. Pandemic and war, not to mention demographics, the digital transformation that's occurring across sectors in the economy, and climate change. So we all live in the world in which facts matter, and their determination needs to precede opinions being formed. There is no such thing, need I say this, as alternative facts. Truth is truth. Lying is wrong. The second great challenge is that our ability in modern democracies to resolve these complex problems is complicated by the increasing difficulty of having sensible adult conversations when we disagree. It seems to me that the more complex the issue, the more fraught the decisions, the greater the need to build consensus, to reach across divisions, and to find common ground. And the greater the need to populate the halls of Parliament and the echelons of bureaucracy with adults, thoughtful, serious people who respect others even when they disagree, and who earn the trust of the citizens who have put them in positions of authority, who are able to confront issues of life and death, of the economy and its health, of peace and security, who bring judgment, gravity, and selfless motivation to the role of problem solver. Thank you. I worry that many such people are unwilling to subject themselves and their families to the mindless, often hateful abuse on regular display in social media, and which sometimes leaks into the physical world. But I remain optimistic. And I offer the struggle with COVID-19 as a case in point. This was the Rubik's Cube of public policy problems. Not only did we not have all the facts about the virus and its method of transmission at the outset of the pandemic, but it was devilishly complex. We had a health problem, including mental health, an economic problem, a social problem, and a governance problem, all rolled into one. How could we discover the complex algorithm of twists and turns that will solve all 6 sides of the Rubik's Cube? This is especially true when trust is low and opinions are formed in echo chambers of thought that exclude meaningful debate. I, for one, am willing to give our governments in Canada a great deal of credit for their response, especially in the early days of the pandemic, and likewise, I give a lot of credit to non-government actors. Not everyone agreed on everything, but to a great degree there was transparency, collaboration, and quick response. Governments defined the rules of public health and provided the necessary financial support to keep the economy on its feet. The business sector built respirators, developed and distributed vaccines, manufactured PPE. Financial institutions deferred payments on loans and mortgages and partnered with government to ensure that the financial system withstood the shock. Telcos enabled video conferencing to a degree that few people believed possible. The health sector faced overwhelming challenges, but at every level, people worked in a spirit of self-sacrifice to get us through it. And in many sectors, from healthcare to retail to banking to agri-food and transportation, frontline workers braved the risks to keep the rest of us safe and supplied with our needs. My late friend and colleague, Colin Powell, liked to say that optimism is a force multiplier. I offer to you that it's not getting easier to govern in our society, but that public service remains the high calling that it has always been. Therefore, as citizens, we need to celebrate and encourage those who would take responsibility for our collective well-being, while also urging them to be respectful of each other and of the public trust. Our public servants and our policymakers are not perfect, but they're damn good. And they're even better when they collaborate, when they partner, when they listen. Let's choose optimism for our future. I worked for a guy who loved to say, Canada is the best country in the world. Vive le Canada. Thank you very much.